Welcome to Sayers and Secrets, where each tale lingers like a shadow on the edge of lamplight. Tonight's mystery unfolds at a dinner table left untouched, where plates of food grow cold and the silence is broken not by conversation, but by the discovery of death. Among the silver cutlery and abandoned wine glasses lies a question more chilling than the meal itself. Who turned a supper into a scene of murder, and why? Before this case unfolds, remind yourself, every silence speaks, and every detail whispers. What's your favorite era for a good mystery? If mysteries cloaked in shadow intrigue you, like this video, and subscribe to join the investigation. Now, light a candle, settle in, and let the mystery begin. I'll say this much. It's not often a man walks into our front room carrying a piping hot ribeye on a sterling silver tray, looking like he's late to his own hanging. But that's exactly how it started. The whole cold supper mess. On a gray Tuesday when even the orchid room smelled faintly of winter garlic and damp newspapers. I had just set down my third cup of coffee, half listening to Wolfe's grumbling from upstairs about an orchid genus that had apparently forgotten how to bloom with dignity, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in a black overcoat so soaked it might have doubled as a portable pond. He was holding the steak tray like it was going to testify against him. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I was told that this might be the only way." "Sure," I said, "if you mean the only way to ruin a decent cut of meat." "Come in." He stepped inside, eyes darting like he was expecting an ambush behind the coat rack. The tray had a folded linen napkin under it, as if it had been yanked off a dining room table mid-dinner. The man himself looked about 40, red-cheeked but pale around the lips, and not the type to wear panic well. He introduced himself as Carlton Avery and offered no handshake. Wolfe wouldn't have taken it anyway. We settled into the front room, and he placed the tray on the side table as if it contained plutonium. "I was told to bring this," he said, "to get Nero Wolfe's attention. It's a message. You're not much for text messaging, I take it." He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward. "The man who was supposed to eat this steak is dead. Less than an hour ago, in my home. And if I tell the police, I'll be the one they lock up." At that point, even I had to admit, Wolfe was going to want to hear this. I went to the door of the plant rooms and bellowed the one phrase that Wolfe hates more than empty saucepans. "Client downstairs." There was a pause, then a sigh from above that could have soured milk. Wolfe lumbered down minutes later, eyebrows already in a scowl. "You interrupted my orchid feeding ritual for a dinner plate?" "It's not dinner," I said. "It's bait." Carlton introduced himself again, this time with more urgency. Wolfe stared at him, not the steak. "Explain," Wolfe said, seating himself. "Begin with the steak." Then the corpse Carlton swallowed and adjusted the napkin beneath the tray. "My brother-in-law, Theodore Quayle. Investment banker. He lives, or lived, in my guest cottage. We hadn't spoken properly in months, but tonight he insisted on dinner. Said he wanted to discuss an investment of the moral kind." Wolfe arched a brow at that. Carlton continued. "I cooked for him. A cold supper. This steak was his main course. He liked his beef nearly blue. But before I could serve it, I found him in his study. Dead, slumped over. No wound, no blood. Just dead," I frowned. "And you ran out of the house carrying the steak?" Carlton looked at me, as if that somehow made more sense than the alternative. He left instructions, written on a torn place card. Just 4 words. "Take it to Wolfe." Wolfe's eyes flicked to the tray, then back to Carlton. "You have not alerted the police?" "No, and I won't unless you make me." "I don't trust them." "Yet you trust me?" Wolfe asked, voice dry. "I trust desperation." "And your reputation?" It was as good a compliment as Wolfe ever got. He let the silence sit for a full 10 seconds before speaking. "What did Mr. Quayle do to make himself worth killing?" Carlton hesitated. He meddled. He always meddled, but recently he was different. He claimed someone in his old investment circle was committing what he called ethical treason. Something about falsified portfolios, dangerous ones. He said he had proof. I never saw it, and now he's dead, I said. Wolfe grunted. And you brought me a steak. It's symbolic, Carlton said. Or coded. He once told me Wolfe doesn't lift a finger without a puzzle on the plate. I do not enjoy riddles in my food, Wolfe said. But I abhor stupidity in my guests more. He reached forward and, to my surprise, removed the lid from the tray. The ribeye sat there, still warm, but tucked just beneath the bone, a small square of waxed paper. I leaned in, handwritten. Grease-proof Wolfe took it with his fingertips and held it to the light. His lips moved as he read, but he didn't speak. Finally, he handed it to me. It read, "Cold is not the opposite of heat. It is the absence of truth." Carlton shifted uncomfortably. Does it mean something? Wolfe pressed his fingers together. Yes, it means you'll not be returning home just yet, and that, as they say, was the moment the brownstone lost its peace. Carlton Avery didn't so much settle in as unravel politely. I've seen my share of shaken men over the years, politicians, philanderers, financiers, but Carlton had that rare blend of guilt, calculation, and genuine alarm that made you wonder which of the three would win by bedtime. Wolfe didn't invite him to stay. He didn't have to. The moment Wolfe examined the grease-proof paper and uttered a grunt of recognition, not understanding, mind you, but interest, Carlton had become more than a visitor. He was a disruption, and Wolfe's brownstone does not take kindly to disruption. I got Avery squared away in the front room with a blanket and a cup of Fritz's bitter chamomile blend, which smells like regret and tastes worse. Wolfe had returned to the plant rooms without a word, a sure sign he needed silence to process whatever it was that the steak and the note had whispered in his ear. By the time he returned, exactly 47 minutes later, punctual as a Swiss divorce lawyer, I'd already run a check on Avery through Lon Cohen's archives at the Gazette. Public records, financials, the usual Snoop stuff. Nothing dirty popped. He was, as advertised, a middling real estate attorney with above-middling taste in cookware and an inherited house near Tarrytown. The brother-in-law, Theodore Quayle, had a longer shadow. Former partner at Ledwich, Harmon, and Trigg, busted quietly for insider trading but never charged. A money man with too many friends and not enough humility. Wolfe entered the office with a slow stomp, the kind that announces he's about to ask for something outrageous. I followed. Archie, get Mr. Avery, I did. Carlton entered like a man asked to defuse his own bomb. Wolfe didn't greet him. You will explain, Wolfe said, why your late brother-in-law wrote my name on a place card and inserted it beneath his uneaten meal like a cheap magician hiding a dove. Carlton blinked. He told me once, that if something ever went wrong and the people he feared were getting too close, he'd leave a signal. He said, if I couldn't trust the authorities, I should trust you, that you would see past appearances. Wolfe grunted. Carlton sat on the edge of the red chair like it might eject him. He had been paranoid these last few weeks. Kept records, scribbled notes. Some of them are about former associates, people I don't know, but also something about his will. He was revising it, he said. Cutting someone out. Who? I don't know. He wouldn't say. Just that it would cause a cold supper to be served before its time. That's what he called it. I thought he was being dramatic. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. He wasn't. I jumped in. We need to go to the house, Wolfe. No, Wolfe said flatly. You will go. I remain, of course. Carlton looked relieved. I'll take you. But if there's press, there won't be, I said. We'll be quiet as guilt. Wolfe gave me a look that suggested subtlety wasn't my strongest suit, then turned back to Avery. I must ask, Did you alter the crime scene in any way? No, I locked the study door before leaving. That's it. I haven't even called his assistant or his lawyer. Good. Archie? Yes, sir. Take Mr. Avery to Terrytown, document the scene, collect any handwritten notes, check Quayle's study, his safe, his wastebasket. Speak to the help, if any. And if you find evidence of poison, call me. I nodded. Carlton stood, halfway between grateful and horrified. Oh, and Archie, Wolfe added as I reached the hall, bring back the steak. Fritz will examine it. Do not let the NYPD intercept it, should they appear. Yes, sir, I said. I'll treat it like Fabergé filet. We left 10 minutes later. The rain had turned to snow, sparse, flecked, the kind that sticks to the collar and makes every street lamp look like a bad idea. Carlton's car was a spotless silver Audi, too clean for a man with a dead body in his house. I resisted the urge to make conversation during the drive. He was chewing something in his mind, and I wasn't sure whether it was fear or calculation. Terrytown greeted us like a forgotten postcard. Bare trees, expensive stone walls, and security cameras that blinked even when you smiled. The house itself was a 1920s colonial with modern teeth. Motion lights, keypad gates, and a driveway that could host a wake. The guest cottage was tucked off to the left, far enough to keep inconvenient relatives from interrupting dinners or divorces. We stepped inside the main house first. Carlton led me straight to the study. He unlocked the door with a hesitant hand. The room smelled like pine, old Scotch, and newer death. Quayle's body was slumped over a walnut desk, one hand still near a fountain pen, the other curled toward a crystal tumbler. His skin had a pale yellow hue that didn't match the wood tones. No bruises, no blood, no signs of struggle. You said he had no known health issues, I asked. None. He jogged, ate like a nutritionist with stock in salmon farms. I scanned the desk, a pile of recent mail, one unopened envelope addressed in handwritten script. Beside it, a legal pad with lines scratched through in ink. A torn sheet at the top, possibly the place card note Wolfe now had. You touch this stuff? I asked. No, just the door handle and his shoulder. When I checked for a pulse, I took photos. Desk, window, bar cart, rug. No signs of anything having been moved in haste. No spills, no smashed glass. Just a dead man in a robe. Then I spotted the folder beneath the blotter. Quayle had tucked it away, but not deeply. Inside were 6 pages, typed, marked in red ink, financial records, a list of names. At the top, TQ, confidential memorandum. Below, Hawthorne Opportunity Fund. I whistled low. Carlton hovered. What is it? Something your brother-in-law didn't want in a cloud server. I took the file, wrapped it in a dry cleaning bag I found in the coat closet, and moved on. The trash revealed something interesting, a burned matchstick in the blackened corner of what looked like parchment paper. Just a fragment, but Wolfe would want it. In the kitchen, I found the supper, cold, congealed, and slightly pink. The second ribeye was still in the warming drawer. No sign of tampering, but I packaged it anyway. I was about to declare the place wrapped when I heard a voice from the foyer. Carlton? A woman. Carlton flinched. Damn. That's Madeline, his assistant. She wasn't supposed to be here. She have a key? She used to. I didn't think. I slipped the steak tray into my bag and stepped forward. Time for Archie Goodwin, unexpected guest, to play friendly. Madeline Quince was 32, sharp-heeled, and looked like she didn't enjoy surprises, unless she was giving them. She spotted me before she spotted the body. Who are you? Friend of the deceased, I said. And you? His assistant. Until about 5 hours ago. He left me a voicemail saying he'd decided to leave the firm, that we were all to keep quiet for our own good. Her eyes shifted to Carlton. And then I got a text from you saying nothing urgent. So why is the study locked? Carlton paled. I stepped in. Madeline, Was Mr. Quayle's voicemail strange in any way? She paused. Yes. His voice was slurred. He never slurred, I nodded. I didn't get much more from Madeline Quince, at least not right then. Once she caught sight of the body, she reacted the way a trained assistant does. Sharp gasp, clenched fists, and a very quick mental sweep of what she might have left on her desk that now looked incriminating. She didn't faint or scream, which I respected, but she did turn pale enough to match the leather in the study. Carlton, ever the deer in high beams, tried to explain. I stopped him. Miss Quince, for the time being, I suggest you don't call anyone. Not the firm. Not his former associates. Not even your mother. If you're as sharp as I think you are, you'll know that silence buys you time, and time is what you'll need if this death is what we suspect it might be. She looked from me to Carlton, then back to the desk where Theodore Quayle was still slumped, like a man who tried to write one last warning but lost the race with whatever stopped his heart. I was supposed to have dinner with him on Friday, she said. He said he'd be ready to tell me the truth about Hawthorne. I thought it was some poetic nonsense. He did that sometimes, but lately, I prompted. He was spooked. Told me someone in the firm had started asking questions they weren't supposed to. Someone senior. And that if anything happened to him, I should go to a man named Saul Panzer. That's how I found your number, I blinked. Saul? Yes, he said Panzer knew the right people. Now that, I admit, was a surprise. People usually find us through less direct means. An uncle's poker buddy, a blackmailed dentist, a bribe passed under a courthouse bench. But for Saul's name to be dropped directly by a man who never met Wolfe in the flesh, that nudged the needle on my internal radar. We left soon after. I secured the food, the memorandum, the fragment of burned paper, and a quick copy of the voicemail Quayle had left Madeline before shuffling off his mortal coil. Back in the Audi, Carlton looked like a man slowly realizing the part of a mystery victim's brother-in-law doesn't always end in a safe fade to black. We drove back to the city in silence, minus one stop for coffee that neither of us drank. Wolfe was waiting in the office, reading a book of German culinary history and frowning like the Bratwurst Empire had betrayed him. "Report," he said, not looking up. I handed him the envelope first, the file from Quayle's study, and then the zip bag with the steak. Fritz emerged from the kitchen, took it with reverent silence, and vanished like a man tasked with reverse engineering a crime through marbling and seasoning. Wolfe leafed through the financial documents with one hand and reached for the burned parchment with the other. "It was partially destroyed," I said. "The rest is ash." "But the handwriting looks like Quayle's." He held it up to the light, squinting. "Worth more than its ledger suggests." What does that mean?" "It means someone has dressed a pig like a swan and intends to pass it off to fools with linen napkins." I sat. "So we've got a dead financier, a suspicious assistant, a paranoid memo, and a warning note in a stake." He tapped the file. "And a fund, Hawthorne Opportunity, that may or may not exist. Should I ask Saul to do a deep dive?" "No," Wolfe said. "Ask him to make contact. If Quayle dropped his name, Panzer will want context before he walks into the thorns." I phoned Saul. He answered on the second ring, and within 10 minutes I briefed him on everything minus the flavor notes of the ribeye. He agreed to start tracing Hawthorne, its board, and Quayle's last 10 business meetings. After I hung up, Wolfe closed the folder. "We will have guests tomorrow, Archie." "Several. I suggest you brace the threshold." "Which guests?" "Begin with Miss Quince, then a man named Gregory Leeds. He's listed here as a minority investor and appears several times in the red ink notes. Then locate Miss Helena Maris, formerly of Quayle's firm. And lastly, a Mr. Finchley. No first name listed, but the memo includes multiple mentions of him alongside dollar amounts and phrases like the quiet route and old loyalty. Sounds like my kind of crowd." He exhaled. "I'm not interested in your preferences." only in their proximity to motive, so I spent the better part of the evening making calls, checking public databases, and bribing a former paralegal for access to a partial client list of Ledwich, Harman, and Trigg. Gregory Leeds was the head of a boutique art valuation firm and spent 3 years on probation for tax avoidance. Helena Maris had left the firm abruptly last spring, supposedly for creative differences. That could mean anything from fraud to someone taking the last scone from the break room. Finchley remained a ghost. The next morning, while Wolfe polished off a breakfast of poached eggs and contempt, our guests began to arrive. Madeline Quince came first, wearing a navy coat and nerves. Wolfe didn't rise, but gave her a nod of acknowledgement that, in his language, ranked just below a papal blessing. "Miss Quince," he said, "you were close to Mr. Quayle. I was his assistant for 4 years. And in those 4 years, how many times did he lie to you?" Her jaw tensed. "Not often. But when he did, it was always to protect someone else." "Curious," Wolfe murmured. "He didn't strike me as the protector type." Gregory Leeds followed next. Bald, fox-faced, and smiling like a man who's used to evading questions with compliments. I met him at the door and kept one hand near my hip, just in case his idea of civility included brass knuckles. Helena Maris arrived just after him. 40-ish, sharp eyes, and a sense of detachment I'd seen before in whistleblowers and jaded novelists. She accepted a seat with a nod, but didn't bother to ask who else was in the room. I liked her already. Finchley, however, was last. And by Finchley, I mean a man who introduced himself as Martin Finchley, claiming to be an accountant from the firm's overseas division. Wolfe watched him like a cat watching a can opener. Wolfe let the silence build until it had furniture of its own. Then he began, "You're all here because Theodore Quayle is dead." He left behind a memorandum, a coded note, and a list of individuals whom he believed were entangled in something he considered treasonous, ethically, if not criminally. Gregory Leeds cleared his throat. "Treason is a strong word." "Not strong enough," Wolfe replied. "What was Hawthorne, Mr. Leeds?" Leeds smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "An investment vehicle." "High risk, high reward," Helena Maris scoffed. "High delusion, more like." "It was a shell. I left because I saw the numbers didn't match the returns." Madeline Quince leaned forward. "Theodore knew someone was falsifying valuations." Wolfe nodded. And yet he did not name who. He left clues. A supper, a note, and a whispered warning. Finchley's voice was quiet. He was going to expose us. "Indeed," Wolfe said. And someone decided the best way to stop that was not to scare him, but to silence him permanently. Leeds stood. "Are you accusing one of us of murder?" "No," Wolfe said. "Not yet." By the time Wolfe dismissed our quartet of potential snake charmers, the air in the office was thick with unasked questions and stale defiance. None of them had broken, of course. Wolfe didn't expect them to. He wasn't looking for guilt served hot. He wanted the flavors to settle, the ingredients to react. What he called palate setting. What I called letting them sweat. Once the front door had shut on the last suspect, Wolfe issued the inevitable order. "Archie, go dig." That was my cue to grab my coat, my notebook, and the mental toolkit that let me smile at liars and know when the tea they offered was more dangerous than the conversation. I started with Madeline Quince, since she'd been the most cooperative and the least polished. She had the look of someone who hadn't yet figured out what not to say. She worked out of a narrow office space on 61st, a converted brownstone floor shared with a dentist, a freelance genealogist, and something called Pathway Consciousness Therapy. Hers was the neatest door. I knocked. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, opening it. "I wondered if you'd show." "I usually do. I make rounds like Santa, only I ask the questions and rarely leave presents." She let me in. The place smelled faintly of peppermint and printer toner. She offered a chair. I took it. "I'll be direct," I said. "What was your role in Hawthorne?" I didn't have one. I typed a few letters. Scheduled meetings. You knew it was a fake fund. I suspected. Theodore didn't tell me much, but he started using private envelopes, hand-delivered things. That was new. He had me shred a file marked H4-asset map 6 weeks ago. I saved one sheet. She stood, opened a filing cabinet, and produced a crumpled sheet inside a manila folder labeled Client Birthday Notes. I raised a brow. Huh, clever. I've been an assistant long enough to know where to file danger. The page listed 5 names, no context, just surnames and dollar amounts. Leeds and Finchley were among them. So were 2 I didn't recognize. Draycott and Harrow. No first names, no titles. Wolfe would hate that. Did you see Theodore the night before he died? No. He cancelled our meeting, said he had something to finish, that it had to be before someone else did. Who? He didn't say. I thanked her, copied the sheet, and left. Outside, the wind had picked up, the kind that slips inside your collar like a secret you weren't ready for. I hailed a cab and told the driver to head downtown, to the last known address of Helena Maris, which I'd lifted from Wolfe's confidential Rolodex under the assumption that she hadn't burned all her bridges. Helena's apartment was what you'd expect from a woman who'd left a high-paying firm in a moral huff and hadn't landed another gig yet. Crisp but spare, like a wine glass that had forgotten the wine. She answered in jeans and a turtleneck and didn't ask why I was there. "I assume you want to know what Theodore was hiding," she said, skipping pleasantries. "I assumed you'd want to tell me." She nodded. "Once, then stepped aside. I knew about Hawthorne. Knew it was a ghost fund. I left before it got serious. But it wasn't just a lie. It was a pipeline. Money came in from clients, but it didn't stay. It was routed through shell corporations. British Virgin Islands, Cyprus. One of them was run by someone named Finchley. I tried to warn Theodore, and he told me I was being paranoid. Then he changed his locks. A month later, he called and said I'd been right. I leaned forward. What changed his mind? Someone tried to bribe him. A man named Harrow. I saw the email, "Do you still have it?" She moved to her laptop, clicked around, then printed something. It was short and anonymized, but it reeked of real fear. "Mr. Quayle, you're overreacting. Let us find a number that keeps everyone comfortable. H." I pocketed it. "Helena, did you know Leeds?" "By reputation." He had access to the valuation side. If the fund wanted to look legitimate, he could make anything sound like gold bricks, even if it was sawdust wrapped in silk. "And Finchley?" She frowned. "Only through whispers. He didn't use his first name. But when he walked into a room, people stopped talking. Next up, Leeds. I found him at his office above a gallery in Soho, all white walls and desperate abstracts. He greeted me like I was either a new investor or someone who could make one appear. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you're here to ask about Theodore's paranoia?" "That, and your role in it." He smirked. I helped him pitch. Gave him data to make things look attractive. I never touched the books, but you knew they were cooked. Cooked is such a hostile word. Think of it as theatrical seasoning, I'll think of it as a motive. "Did you speak with Quayle the day he died?" I sent him a message. Told him I was out. I didn't want to be part of the cleanup. Cleanup. Leeds' smile faded. Finchley said things were moving fast, that Theodore needed to shut up or someone else would shut him down. That sounds a lot like a threat. I took it that way. That's why I walked. He poured himself a drink, offered me one. I declined. "You're taking a risk, Leeds," I said. "If Quayle was poisoned, you'll be in the ring. Especially if you knew who was behind it and said nothing." His eyes flicked toward the window. "I'm not the one with poison on my hands." My last stop was Finchley, or at least the man claiming to be Finchley. The truth was, I still didn't know his full name. His appointment had come through Wolfe's note, and he hadn't given a business card. But Saul had run facial recognition and come up with a hit. Martin Finchley, former compliance officer for a now-defunct insurance group tied to 2 major embezzlement scandals. Quiet, polite, and never charged. I caught him coming out of a building in Midtown. I followed at a comfortable distance until he turned into a coffee shop, sat at a cornered table, and pulled out a leather-bound notepad. I sat down across from him. He didn't blink. I wondered when you'd show. You made it easy. You don't exactly blend in. He smiled faintly. That's because I don't have to. What was your role in Hawthorne? I made sure the right people never saw the wrong reports. And Quayle? He was starting to believe in redemption. That's dangerous in our line of work. You threatened him. I advised him to stay quiet. He didn't listen. Did you kill him? I don't cook. I stood. That's clever. But you're still on the stove. I left him there, sipping something green and expensive, but the image stuck with me. A man too calm, too resigned. Back at the brownstone, I dumped everything onto Wolfe's desk, the copy of the shredded memo, the email from Harrow, the client names, and a fresh steak sandwich Fritz had prepared, free of coded messages. Wolfe sifted through it all with his usual precision. Very good, Archie, he said. The circle is closing, which means someone among them already believes they've gotten away with murder. He looked up, and that, of course, is when they always begin to slip. The next morning started with snow, a grumpy orchid report from Wolfe, and a sense that something in the brownstone had shifted overnight. It wasn't the sort of shift you could measure with a ruler or even spot with a glance. But Fritz was quieter than usual. The mail arrived late, and Saul Panzer hadn't returned his nightly update. In Wolfe's world, those were cosmic tremors. I had just finished typing up my notes from yesterday's field parade when Wolfe called me into the office. He was seated, as always, and wore the expression of a man who had identified a tick in the wallpaper. "Archie," he said, "we've been trespassed." I blinked. "You mean someone's been here?" "Precisely." I looked around. The office was its usual tidy self. Books aligned, globe untouched, Persian rug unwrinkled. Wolfe's orchid type-in gleamed like a miniature warning. I frowned. "You're sure?" "I am not in the habit of guessing," Wolfe said dryly. The drawer on the left of my desk was moved precisely 3 millimeters. I do not move it. You do not touch it. And Fritz, bless him, fears it like a live wire. I crossed to the desk and opened the drawer. Inside, everything seemed in order. Stationery, a stack of Wolfe's embossed envelopes, and a small wooden box that, as far as I knew, contained the man's lifelong resistance to unnecessary movement. But Wolfe wasn't bluffing. If he said it had been disturbed, it had. "Someone looking for something?" I asked, or verifying its absence. That particular phrase didn't sit well, not because it was poetic, but because it implied someone already knew what was supposed to be there, or thought they did. I sat across from him. "When?" "Last night, after you returned, but before I resumed my reading. I left the office briefly. Fritz was upstairs. It would have taken no more than 20 seconds. That narrowed things down to the kind of trespasser who either had a key or who could unlock doors quietly enough to shame a cat burglar. I stood. "You want me to check the locks?" He waved a hand. "Of course." "And then call Saul. He's late." The locks, it turned out, were untouched. No scratches, no signs of forced entry. Nothing added, nothing removed. The front door was pristine. The windows bolted. The service entrance showed no disturbance. It was the sort of nothing that suggested too much. I phoned Saul. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Yeah," he said. "I know. I'm late." Wolfe noticed. He would. "You all right?" "I'm fine. Just had a situation. Someone tried to tail me yesterday." I straightened. "And?" "I lost them. But it wasn't amateur hour. Whoever they were smart, smooth, kept distance. drove a dull grey Hyundai. No plates. I did a triple loop down East 42nd. They didn't flinch. I ducked into the public library and waited them out. Lost them eventually. You think it's about Hawthorne? Probably. Or Quayle's memo. Somebody's nervous. I relayed the call to Wolfe, who frowned deeper with each sentence. If they're tailing Saul, I said, they're either bold or desperate. Or both, Wolfe muttered. Desperation, as I've often said, is the death of subtlety. Do you think they came in here? No. Saul was not followed here. He would not permit it. This was a separate incident. Someone who wanted to ensure we remained uninformed. What were they looking for? Possibly the memorandum, or the parchment scrap, or something they suspect Quayle gave us, like the note in the stake. Precisely. That got me thinking, not about the note itself. We'd already dissected that like a frog in biology, but about the tray it came in. Carlton Avery had brought the whole plate under a cloth napkin. Fritz had cleaned the silver, stored the tray, and scrubbed the utensils. But we hadn't rechecked them, not for fingerprints, not for anomalies. I went down to the kitchen. Fritz was chopping shallots and listening to a Bach fugue that sounded like it had a personal vendetta against silence. Fritz, I said, where's the tray, Mr. Avery brought in? He looked up, puzzled. In the cabinet. Why? Did you clean it? Of course. It was splattered. Grease. Meat residue. Did you notice anything odd? He tilted his head. One of the tray's feet was shorter than the others. I assumed it had been dropped. I opened the cabinet, pulled out the tray and flipped it. Sure. Enough. One foot had a felt pad that was thinner than the rest. I peeled it away gently. Underneath, tucked into a shallow recess, was a thin slice of card, laminated, about 2 inches wide. I held it up. It was a dry cleaning receipt, but not just any receipt. It listed an order, 2 suits, 1 dress shirt, and a pocket square, under the name F. Harrow, dated 3 days ago, the day before Quayle died. I took the slip upstairs, handed it to Wolfe, and waited. He examined it in silence for 20 seconds. That's all? No, that's a clue. Which part? F. Harrow. A name from the memo. A ghost, I nodded. We've got an address from the receipt. I'll head there now, go armed. I always do. An hour later, I was standing outside a storefront dry cleaner in Hell's Kitchen. The windows were fogged. Inside, a woman of indeterminate age and sharp elbows eyed me like I'd come to buy the place out from under her. F. Harrow, I said. Pick up. She squinted at me, then walked into the back. She returned with a garment bag and a question. You his nephew? Something like that. She grunted. He's got expensive taste. Who tailors his cuffs? God? I paid the ticket and walked out with the bag. Back in the cab, I unzipped the outer cover. The suit inside was navy, well pressed, and bore a dry cleaner's tag marked with an address, one I hadn't seen before. It was in Tribeca. Back at the brownstone, I laid it out for Wolfe. Tribeca, I said. New address. The pocket square had a monogram. FHI checked the label. Custom tailored out of Milan. Harrow's not just a name. He's got money. Style. And he's not hiding, not yet, Wolfe said. But he will be. Why? Because, Archie, someone has just realized their margin of safety is narrowing. And men like Harrow don't like edges. That night, Wolfe asked Fritz to serve dinner in the dining room. That was unusual. Not a full-on emergency, but close. He used his fork with surgical precision, then turned to me. We've been tested. We've been watched. Now we must provoke. How? Invite Harrow. Offer him his suit? I blinked. He's going to know we know. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair. Oh boy, I said. Here comes the bait. Sending an invitation to a man like F. Harrow required a certain kind of nerve. Not the kind you bluff your way through a poker game with, This was surgical nerve, the quiet kind that makes its move while the other guy is still admiring his own bluff. Wolfe dictated the note himself, short and venom-laced with civility. It read, "Mr. Harrow, a suit was left in our possession under circumstances requiring clarification. I would appreciate the courtesy of your presence tomorrow at 4 o'clock, where the matter can be resolved directly. Nero Wolfe." I delivered it myself, naturally. The Tribeca address from the cleaner's tag belonged to a top-floor loft in a building too modern for its own good. The hallway smelled like teak oil and tax evasion. I didn't ring. I slipped the envelope under the door and walked off without a sound. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe remained immobile but active, which is to say, he didn't rise once, but orchestrated our situation like Toscanini with a full orchestra. He sent Saul to check security camera angles near Quayle's cottage, asked Fritz to photograph the receipt's serial number for record-keeping, and had me compile a timeline of every documented contact between Theodore Quayle and anyone linked to the Hawthorne Fund in the past 3 months. By the time Harrow's reply arrived, hand-delivered by a silent courier, in gray slacks and zero expression, Wolfe had every piece arranged on his desk like he was preparing a chessboard. The note was equally concise. "Mr. Wolfe, if this is an attempt to provoke me, it has succeeded. I'll be there at 4. Wear something less self-satisfied. F.H." I read it aloud. Wolfe didn't smile, but his eyes held a flicker of satisfaction. "Perfect," he said. "He's off balance." "Is that a good thing?" "For us, yes. For him, it depends on how well he improvises." Wolfe didn't like improvisers. They disturbed the tidy logic of his universe. But he counted on them all the same, especially when he wanted someone to make a mistake. At 3:50 the next day, the front door bell rang. I was at my post. I opened it. Harrow was taller than I expected. Slim, polished, and dressed in a tailored gray coat that probably had a name more expensive than my car. His eyes were not the kind that wandered. They studied. "You're Goodwin," he said. "The one who follows, listens, and occasionally punches." "Not necessarily in that order," I replied. "Come in." He stepped through like a man entering a room he'd already mapped. I led him to the office. Wolfe didn't rise. He never did. "Mr. Harrow," Wolfe said. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't have a choice," Harrow replied. "When someone starts waving your dry cleaning around like a ransom note, you answer." "Dry cleaning is merely context," Wolfe said. "The content is what interests me." Harrow sat without being asked. I didn't like that. People who take chairs uninvited tend to think they own something, or plan to. "I assume you know why you're here," Wolfe said. "To be needled, perhaps." "Threatened. I've played this game before." "Not with me," Wolfe said. There was a pause. Harrow glanced toward me, then back at Wolfe. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm suggesting," Wolfe said, "that you had a reason to silence Theodore Quayle, a man who had quite suddenly lost the appetite for deception." Harrow smiled. "You assume I had anything to do with Hawthorne?" "No," Wolfe said. "Quayle did. And Quayle knew you. The suit you left behind suggests you visited his home or were there recently. Your name appears in documents tied to shell companies routed through the Hawthorne Fund. You left a trail. It's faint, but it's there, circumstantial." "Of course," Wolfe said. "For now." Harrow leaned back. "You have no proof." "I don't need it," Wolfe said calmly. "I only need your reaction." And just like that, Harrow's mask cracked, not shattered, not broken, just cracked enough for me to see the twitch at his jawline. A man who knew he'd walked into a room he couldn't control. He stood. This was charming. I'll leave my address in case you want to send more laundry-related correspondence. "You'll leave it with the police," I said. "You're under informal surveillance." He turned to me. "By who?" "Panzer. He likes shadows more than I do." Harrow looked to Wolfe one last time. "This isn't over," I hope not, Wolfe said. After he left, Wolfe turned to me. He's frightened. He's also furious. He will retaliate. Retaliate how? Wolfe looked down at his fingertips. By trying to discredit us. Or by accelerating whatever he's planning. Either way, pressure will force him to act rashly. We must be ready. We didn't have to wait long. That night, someone tried to break into Fritz's pantry. I heard the clink of a metal latch while getting a late coffee refill and followed it to the kitchen. The small pantry door, locked every evening, was ajar. Inside, Fritz's jars were untouched, but a drawer had been opened. Its contents, a collection of sealed containers, including the residue sample from Quayle's steak, had been disturbed. Fritz, summoned from upstairs, turned pale. I didn't unlock this. Wolfe arrived a moment later, robe over shirt, not happy. They were looking for the meat, he said. Why? I asked. Because they're worried it contains something damning. Poison? Or its absence, Wolfe said. Something subtle. Something traceable. I checked the back entrance. The lock was scratched. Someone had tried to force it open, then picked it instead. They didn't succeed, which meant they had access from somewhere else, possibly a copy of the service key. I returned to Wolfe. This isn't just about Quayle, I said. This is about panic. Harrow's people, if he has people, are circling. Which means they're weakening, Wolfe replied. We will accelerate. He made calls the next morning, one to Saul, one to Inspector Kramer. Why Kramer? I asked. He's going to want to walk in here breathing fire. He will. That's precisely what I need. The plan, if Wolfe could be said to admit to such things, was to force the suspects into a bottleneck. Pressure from the law, suspicion from their peers, and an unexpected tightening of Wolfe's grip. He had me resummon Madeline Quince, Leeds, Finchley, and Maris. They must believe the climax is approaching, Wolfe said. What if it isn't? It is, he said, but not theirs. As the afternoon ticked by, I felt the coil tighten. Madeline arrived first, nervous, glancing around. Then Helena Maris, composed but watchful. Leeds was next, face tight, palms sweating. Finchley walked in last, briefcase in hand, as if that gave him control. Wolfe nodded to me. I nodded back. It was time. There are few things more dangerous than a man like Nero Wolfe deciding it's time to stop reacting and start maneuvering. That afternoon, with all 4 suspects under his roof and an air thick enough to butter toast, Wolfe leaned back in his chair like a man surveying a chessboard with 3 moves left and every knight right where he wanted it. I stood behind him near the globe, watching our guests settle in like wary livestock. Madeline Quince, nervous but determined. Helena Maris, composed and measuring. Gregory Leeds, twitchy with a brandy-glazed smirk. And Finchley, who looked like a compliance officer already rehearsing his deposition. Wolfe didn't speak for the first minute. He let them sit in the silence like it was a 5th guest. When he did speak, it was with the casual menace of a man who knew the exact temperature at which lies boil. This gathering is not a formality. It is a necessity. Theodore Quayle is dead. He died unexpectedly after dinner was prepared, but not consumed. The meal, as some of you know, contained no toxins. It was a red herring, symbolic, coded, and intended for me. Madeline swallowed hard. Wolfe continued. The coded message left by Quayle, cold is not the opposite of heat, it is the absence of truth, was not a metaphor, it was a directive. The truth had been removed, stripped from the fund, from the ledgers, from the narrative. What remained was artifice. And artifice, as you may soon discover, is a poor shield when examined closely. Leeds tried to laugh. I suppose this is the part where we all get accused of murder? No, Wolfe said. This is the part where I strip away the lies and watch who blinks. He turned to me. Archie. I stepped forward, pulled out the laminated dry cleaning receipt, and held it up. This was found tucked beneath a tray brought into this house by Carlton Avery, Theodore Quayle's brother-in-law. The tray came from the dinner that Theodore never ate. Hidden beneath it was this receipt, in the name of F. Harrow. 3 items, all cleaned the day before Quayle died. The receipt includes an address, a Tribeca loft, and it matches the monogrammed pocket square left inside the suit. F.H. stands for Franklin Harrow. Some of you may have met him. Some of you, I suspect, may have worked for him. Helena leaned forward. Worked for? Wolfe steepled his fingers. Harrow is not just a financier. He is an architect of deception. He designed Hawthorne not to generate returns, but to launder and route money into a set of offshore holding companies. Each company, of course, was in someone else's name. Names like Finchley crossed his legs but said nothing. Wolfe turned to him. Mr. Finchley, you're a phantom. Your employment history is a patchwork of firms that no longer exist. Your filings are absent from every registry that matters, and you carry a briefcase you've never opened. You don't deny it. Finchley's voice was even. I have no obligation to confirm or deny anything here. Of course not, Wolfe replied. Not yet. Then he gestured to the side table where a copy of Quayle's memorandum lay beside a small box, one Fritz had prepared earlier. In this box is a sample of the steak that was to be served to Quayle, Wolfe said. It was tested by Fritz and by a separate lab. No poison was found, but that is the point. There was no tampering with the steak because the message wasn't in the food. It was in the delivery, Helena spoke. The tray. Precisely, Wolfe said. The tray was planted with a receipt, knowing we would find it. A dry cleaning ticket, smuggled in under a napkin. That's a strange place for a clue, unless the sender didn't want to speak out loud. Leeds shifted in his chair. This is wild conjecture. Wolfe gave him a look that could have sliced roast duck. You were Theodore's presentation man, Mr. Leeds. Your name appears on drafts, pitch decks, and fake portfolios. You made the product look palatable to investors who never asked what was inside. You left the fund shortly before Quayle's death. Why? Leeds licked his lips. He was becoming erratic. No, Wolfe said, voice firm. He was becoming honest. And honesty is poison to men like Harrow, Wolfe turned next to Madeline. You, Miss Quince, were privy to Theodore's calendar, his communications, and, I suspect, his fears. Did he tell you that he'd made contact with a reporter? She went still. No, she said. But her voice was too flat. Wolfe continued. We have evidence that Quayle emailed a journalist, initials DM, from the Wall Street Dispatch. He was preparing to leak documents that implicated Finchley, Harrow, and at least one partner who remains unnamed. But he waited too long, and that gave someone time to act. I watched the room like a hawk. Finchley's left hand flexed. Leeds' eyes darted to Helena, and Helena, to her credit, remained still. Madeline looked ready to either cry or confess, but Wolfe didn't press. Not yet. Then he shifted the energy completely. Kramer arrives in 15 minutes, he said casually, with warrants, and one of you will be taken out in cuffs. But I offer this courtesy. Admit what you've done, and I may argue leniency. That was the bait, and the hook sank fast. Leeds cracked first. I didn't touch him, he said, voice brittle. I swear, I didn't kill him. I just... Look, Harrow said Quayle needed scaring. He wanted leverage. I gave him the meeting times. That's all, Helena gasped. You gave him access. Leeds turned to her. He promised it wouldn't go far. Just a confrontation. Wolfe's face remained stone. So Harrow knew where Quayle would be, what time he'd dine, and what he'd serve. Yes, Leeds admitted, but he didn't poison him. I swear, he said something about getting the message across. That's all. Finchley, Wolfe said. Your turn. Finchley stood. This is a farce. I want a lawyer. Wolfe nodded. You'll have one. After Kramer arrives, Finchley stormed out without another word. Helena looked at Wolfe. "What now?" "Now," he said, "we wait for Harrow to make his final move." "Won't he run?" Wolfe smiled faintly. "No. He's too proud. He'll come back to finish it himself, and he would." Wolfe had planned for it. Every suspect was cracking, every layer peeled. The final chord was approaching. Wolfe didn't dismiss the suspects after leads cracked. He let them sit there, stewing in the office as if they'd become part of the furniture, worn and badly arranged. The silence grew dense. Wolfe, meanwhile, returned to the safer topic of his lunch menu with Fritz, as if nothing monumental had been uttered about secret meetings, a dead financier, and a shell fund riddled with dirty money. It was classic Wolfe. Let the silence ferment, not for flavor, but for effect. Kramer arrived 13 minutes past the moment Wolfe predicted, which, in Wolfe's world, counts as being late enough to warrant insult. He barged into the brownstone with his usual lack of ceremony and the precise odor of cheap cigars and institutional soap. "What the hell is this, Wolfe?" he barked, shrugging off his coat with the subtlety of a fire drill. "You got Saul Panzer telling me to come in person because there's a financial conspiracy, a dead man, and now 4 civilians sitting in your office like it's a group therapy session." "I did," Wolfe said calmly. "And they are not civilians. They are participants. Whether as architects, enablers, or accessories remains to be fully clarified. But yes, they are present, and their relevance is no longer in question." Kramer stared at Wolfe, then me. "Goodwin." "Explain, happy to," I said. "Quayle left a memo detailing a scheme. Fake fund, fake valuation data, real money, and real offshore accounts. He tried to blow the whistle. He died before he could. Now we know Leeds was feeding information to a man named Harrow, Franklin Harrow, who's been staying just outside reach, while others like Finchley played the frontmen." "Finchley?" Kramer muttered, already pulling a notebook. "I've heard of him." "You've heard of his ghost," Wolfe said. "The man's existed under so many aliases it would take a tax attorney and a medium to untangle them. He left before you arrived." Kramer turned on Wolfe. "So we're just letting suspects walk now?" "No," Wolfe said. "We're inviting them to return." Kramer opened his mouth, then closed it. He was getting that twitch under his eye again, the one that flared when Wolfe refused to play by precinct rules. "We have enough for an investigation," Wolfe said, tapping the memo, the receipt, the forged asset statements, and the transcript from Saul's earlier conversation with one of Quayle's former clients, who'd been promised a guaranteed 14% annual return. Wolfe didn't lie. He didn't exaggerate. He just presented the stack like a maitre d' offering a wine list soaked in arsenic. "All right," Kramer growled. "I'll put out a feeler on Harrow and a bolo on Finchley, but you're not a cop, Wolfe. You're a civilian. And if you keep playing this like a stage play, I'm going to get a judge to revoke your license to practice. Whatever the hell it is you call what you do." "I call it thought," Wolfe replied. Kramer threw up a hand, turned, and marched into the office like a bull checking its reflection in the mirror. Our 4 suspects had remained seated, mostly because I was stationed at the door and the brownstone has a reputation. Kramer loomed like a cloud system, but Wolfe motioned him to stand behind me. "We are approaching the end," Wolfe said, folding his hands. "And the truth is neither complex nor melodramatic. It is merely uncomfortable, but it can be endured, if admitted." He looked directly at Leeds, who had taken up residence on the edge of panic. "You knew Quayle was preparing to leave the fund. You said Harrow asked for information. Why did you give it?" "Because I didn't think it would go this far," Leeds muttered. "I thought Harrow just wanted to scare him off, like he'd done to others." "Others?" Kramer snapped. "You mean this isn't the first time?" Leeds nodded weakly. 2 years ago, another guy, Sam Wellesley. Same story. Built a fund, tried to get out clean. Car crash in Vermont. No one looked into it." Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. "Miss Maris," he said, "you left the fund before its collapse." "Why?" "Because Quayle was losing control. And Harrow was gaining it," Helena said. "I had nothing to do with the finances after that. I just wanted out. Wolfe nodded, not quite accepting, but not dismissing either. Then he turned to Madeline. Miss Quince, why did you withhold the email from Quayle to the dispatch? It was not in his study. She hesitated. Because I deleted it. He told me he'd changed his mind, that he thought he might be in danger. He didn't want to start a war unless he had solid proof. And I wanted to protect him. He was kind. Too kind. You weren't protecting him, Wolfe said. You were protecting his fear. She looked down. Kramer took a step forward. Is there anyone who actually did something helpful in this mess? Wolfe raised one eyebrow. Only Quayle, who, in his last moments, chose not to name names, but to leave a trail. He embedded evidence in his surroundings. He left a trail of behavior, motive, and indirect consequence. And ultimately, he left us a name. Harrow. At that moment, Saul Panzer returned, quietly, efficiently, with a piece of news. He's here, Saul said. Harrow's outside, and he's not alone, Kramer growled. Not another guest. He brought legal counsel, Saul said, but he wants to come in. Wolfe nodded. Of course. Show him in. I watched the tension climb in the room like mercury. Helena sat upright. Leeds flinched. Madeline exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for 3 days, and then Franklin Harrow entered. He was as crisp as ever, impeccable suit, gloved hands, a gaze that skimmed the room like he was pricing it. Mr. Wolfe, he said, you summoned. I answer, no, Wolfe replied. You trespassed. I react, Harrow raised an eyebrow. I believe you know, Mr. Kramer, Wolfe added. Kramer stepped forward. Franklin Harrow, I'm placing you under investigative detainment regarding financial fraud, obstruction, and potential connection to the death of Theodore Quayle. Harrow's smile barely flickered. You don't have proof. Wolfe spoke softly now. But we have pressure. And pressure breaks men who rely on secrecy. He paused. Let the moment breathe. And you, Mr. Harrow, have just walked into a house where secrecy does not last. Harrow turned his gaze to Wolfe for a full 5 seconds, then said, You think you've won? No, Wolfe replied. I think you've lost. The moment Franklin Harrow stepped into that office with the slow precision of a man who'd never once been refused entry, the air changed. Not like thunder rolling in, but more like the sudden hush before a verdict. Harrow didn't look at Kramer again. His attention, razor-sharp and self-assured, was on Wolfe. You've made quite a mess, he said. You've accused me of what? Financial impropriety? A whisper campaign? Conspiracy? Wolfe didn't blink. Murder, Harrow laughed. You'll find that hard to prove. Wolfe adjusted his weight in the chair, not rising, of course, but shifting just enough to imply preparation. I'd seen it before, the verbal crouch before the pounce. I do not intend to prove it to a jury, he said. I intend to show it to you. And then, Mr. Harrow, I intend to leave the rest to men like Inspector Kramer, whose patience is shorter than mine and whose jurisdiction broader. Kramer grunted in agreement. Wolfe continued. You orchestrated a shell scheme, Hawthorne Opportunity Fund. Built with facades, reinforced with counterfeit documents and false confidence, courtesy of Mr. Leeds flinched. You routed funds through dummy corporations, offshore accounts, paperboard partnerships. The goal was not to gain, but to obfuscate. Some of the money, as we've now confirmed, was sourced from institutional clients, retirement funds, non-profits, places that wouldn't ask too many questions unless a loss became conspicuous. Your strategy relied on volume, not scrutiny. Harrow crossed his arms. That's not illegal. Not yet. But we're not finished. Wolfe gestured to the sideboard, where I had laid out the key artifacts. The memo, the laminated dry cleaning slip, the photos of the steak tray, and a clean transcript of the voicemail Quayle had left Madeline Quince hours before he died. Wolfe's eyes rested on it. Theodore Quayle had a conscience. It arrived late, but it arrived. He sought to extricate himself. More than that, he was prepared to speak. He drafted the memorandum. He contacted a reporter. He prepared a statement, which he never delivered. Harrow cut in. Because you stopped him. You're implying I killed him myself? Wolfe's lips thinned. No, you didn't poison him. You didn't need to. That would have been too risky, too traceable. What you did was far more cunning. You frightened him. You sent a message, and you made certain he understood it without it ever being spoken aloud. Kramer stepped forward. You're saying it wasn't murder? Oh, it was, Wolfe said, but of a different sort. Not by blade or bullet, but by collapse. A coronary, brought on by intense stress, surging blood pressure, isolation, panic. It was known that Quayle had a mild cardiac arrhythmia. He took beta blockers. Under ordinary conditions, it is manageable. Under extraordinary pressure, particularly psychological threat, it becomes fatal. Wolfe pointed to the receipt. He found this tucked under the tray before his dinner. A dry cleaning ticket from Harrow. You hadn't visited him. He hadn't seen you in months. But this, delivered in silence, told him you'd been inside his house. Leeds swallowed hard. I didn't give him the tray. I just told him about the meeting. You told Harrow when Quayle would be home. Alone, Wolfe said. That was enough. Harrow had someone enter, leave the note, and exit without a trace. The message was simple. We can reach you. We have reached you. That alone was enough. Not enough to kill a man, Harrow said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. It was. Because Quayle had prepared the stake himself. Carlton Avery confirmed this. Quayle was obsessed with the idea that his death would be made to look natural. The moment he found that receipt, something only Harrow could have left, he believed the next breath might be his last. And eventually, it was Kramer. Frowned. So you're saying Harrow killed him by causing a heart attack? Yes, Wolfe said, and it was calculated. Cold. Not the opposite of heat, as Quayle so cleverly wrote, but the absence of truth, the suppression of truth by fear. A clean death without mess, Madeline Quince stood suddenly. He knew, she said, eyes wide. When he called me, his voice, it was trembling. I thought he was just nervous, but now he was terrified. Harrow didn't speak. He just stared. Wolfe, satisfied, gave the final blow. You left the suit at the dry cleaner to tie up a loose end, but Quayle got there first. He took the receipt and hid it. That slip was meant to be picked up quietly, erased. But by hiding it under the tray, Quayle made it the message itself. He looked directly at Harrow. You didn't expect him to come here. You didn't expect him to leave anything at all, but he did. Not a note, not a confession, but a breadcrumb. And your mistake, was assuming he'd be too scared to act. He was, but only just. There was a long pause. Kramer stepped forward again, this time slower. Franklin Harrow, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction, and as an accessory in the death of Theodore Quayle. Anything you say will be picked apart by 12 bored people in wool coats, Harrow snapped, but he didn't resist. He turned toward the door, pausing only once to glance back at Wolfe. You play a long game, he said, but games like this don't always end where you think. No, Wolfe said. Sometimes they end with the opponent walking himself to checkmate. Kramer took Harrow's arm and led him out. Saul followed with quiet efficiency. I stayed. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and finally closed his eyes. I looked around at what was left. The suspects were gone. The air was lighter. Even Fritz, hovering in the doorway, seemed to breathe easier. I cleared my throat. Well, sir, I'd say that was one hell of a cold supper. Wolfe opened one eye. Indeed, he said. And now I believe it is time for something warm. The next morning broke clean and quiet. The kind of wintry sunlight that didn't bother to warm anything but made the city look honest for a few hours. Wolfe, of course, had no intention of venturing into it. He'd resumed his regular orchid schedule, and the only thing louder than the steam hissing from the kitchen radiator was the sound of silence now that Franklin Harrow was in custody. I'd just finished typing up the last portion of the case notes, an entry Wolfe would never read but insist be catalogued in full, when he called out from the plant room. "Archie." I set the Remington aside and walked into the greenhouse. Wolfe was standing, improbably, in front of the odontoglossums, a small pair of garden shears in hand, and the faintest crease in his brow. "The quail matter," he said, not turning. "Have you filed the transcript with the Gazette?" I gave Lon Cohen a version. The clean one. No names outside what Kramer already authorized. Good. He clipped a single wilted blossom with the delicacy of a man performing heart surgery. "It was not a case I wanted," he said. "I remember," I replied. "You made that clear when Carlton Avery brought in a steak like a peace offering." Wolfe gave a tight grunt of agreement. "It was inelegant. A death without blood, but not without violence. Frightening a man to death," I said, "takes a special kind of evil." "No," Wolfe said, finally turning. "It takes cowardice. Men like Harrow do not kill because they are bold. They kill because they cannot bear to be confronted. Their world is a pane of glass, and any truth is a stone." He brushed a bit of soil from his sleeve and gestured for me to follow him back inside. Downstairs, breakfast had been cleared. The mail lay sorted on the credenza. Fritz had left a note in his elegant handwriting. "Duck confit for dinner. 2-day marinade. Recommend silence before eating." Wolfe settled into his chair. "Kramer will want a statement." "He got one," I said. "Your speech was theatrical enough to play on Broadway." He shifted, looked toward the bookshelf, then back at me. "There's a distinction, Archie," he said, "between solving a crime and understanding it. Most men do not care for the latter. But I find it essential understanding Harrow." I asked. "No, understanding Quayle." That caught me. Wolfe didn't often dwell on victims. The dead were facts, fixed in time, unmoving, unchanging. For Wolfe, they were pieces in a logic puzzle, rarely sources of sentiment. But something about Quayle had registered deeper. "He left no confession," Wolfe said. "No accusations, only breadcrumbs. He did not scream. He signaled he knew he wouldn't make it through," I said. "He picked you. He didn't want revenge. He wanted to be heard." Wolfe didn't respond immediately. He reached for the memorandum, the original, not the copy, and ran a thumb over the edge of the paper like a man reading Braille. "He could have gone to the police," he said. "He tried. He tried everything but trusting the system." Wolfe nodded slowly. He did what frightened men rarely do. He acted, subtly. But with intent, he looked up at me. "You think Kramer will convict Harrow? If not for murder, then conspiracy. There's enough to bury him in paperwork and depositions for the next decade. And leads. He's already flipping," I said. "Gave Kramer 3 more names tied to the offshore laundering. He's not going to jail. He's going to the testimony." Wolfe grunted, disapproving but unsurprised. "Fritz believes he saw someone on the back terrace last night," he said suddenly. I blinked. "What?" "He told me this morning. After Harrow was arrested. He saw movement near the ivy. Too tall for Saul, too broad for Kramer. Whoever it was didn't enter, still circling the house." "Yes." I rose immediately. "Should I check?" "No," Wolfe said. "They've seen what they came to see." He held up the dry cleaning slip, now preserved in a plastic sleeve, and set it down atop the memo. "The breadcrumb led to the table," he said. "That was all they needed. Now they'll run more suspects, more men like Harrow," he said, "but not here." Not today. I paced for a moment, the unease crawling up my spine. But Wolfe had already reclined, eyes closing beneath the weight of philosophical digestion. You're really letting this go? He opened one eye. No, but I will let it breathe. The next one will surface when it can't help itself. He closed his eyes again. I stood there, waiting, then walked to the window. Outside, the sidewalk was salted and clean. A kid passed with a sled over one shoulder, a thermos dangling from the other. Snow softened the world. Behind me, Wolfe stirred once more. Archie. Yeah? Have Fritz serve lunch in the dining room today. I turned. Another occasion? No, but today we eat warm. That was his way. Never a toast, never a eulogy. Just a course correction. So I set the table. As I laid out the linen, I thought of Theodore Quayle's last quiet act, of the receipt hidden under the tray, of the fear that wrote no letter but left a sign. And I thought of Wolfe, following the trail not with anger, but with precision, step by step, until the quiet thing became loud enough for justice. By the time Fritz entered with the first course, the brownstone was still again. No suspects, no shouting, just the three of us, gathered at a table where silence was the reward. Wolfe raised his fork. Duck, he said. Properly prepared. Like truth. Best served after the heat has settled, I didn't argue.